All right, everybody, let me go ahead and share my screen. This time we're going to go into the second lecture, which is doing gender determining gender. This one will be quite a bit shorter than the last one because there was a lot to go over in the last one. This one is very important because it's talking about how social interaction might change or impact how you do gender, correct? Okay, so they're going to talk about determining gender, which is this, as they put it, the umbrella term for social practices of placing others in gender categories, right? So it's when you're walking down the street and you see somebody, do you automatically identify them as a he, as a she, as something, as somebody that you can't quite figure out? And how does that impact your interactions, right? So that's what we're going to talk about. When we talk about determining gender, in the courts, we're specifically talking about the use of genitalia, hormones, other kind of markers as a way to embody those things. And usually that's comes about because of circumstances, say maybe like there have been several trans women murdered due to the idea that if a man goes into some kind of interaction with that woman and that person, that man determines that gender as female and comes into a different kind of encounter, maybe a sexual encounter where that is undermined in their mind based on genitalia or what have you, and then they form some kind of brutal act upon this trans woman, that unfortunately in the courts will be looked at as her being deceptive or kind of deceitful, this idea of this like trans panic or this queer panic, this, well, I'm not gay or I'm not this, determining that that interaction is different because that now the court will rule and determine that person as a different gender. The same way they do this with murder victims, they do this within, we've talked several times about the Olympics and about courts and about sports. We also talk about this in connection to bathroom bills, which we're going to get into, I think, in a different, or we have already gotten into. But we talk about this in the way that, oh, it's in this one. The way in which those courts utilize this idea of panic in order to create or manifest gender in a different kind of setting and refer it back to sex and not include or understand this spectrum in which individuals can vary between hormone levels and what have you as a natural part of being human, right? So things we've talked about in previous lectures, especially when we're talking about the difference between sex and gender, right? Courts are going to look at that in very peculiar ways when it comes to bathroom bills or when it comes to Olympics and exclusion. And we again talked about this, but it happens in other settings as well. And it can lead to justifications for violence and other things that are unacceptable and leave us in this panic state as a society, in which case most of it comes down to just a general lack of knowledge and understanding the difference, right? And so we're going to make sure that we go through some of these things. Most non-sexual interactions, though, we don't deal with or really come in contact, or should not, especially come in contact with someone's genitalia. And instead, we're looking at gender and determining gender based on this idea of social cues and performance, based on how they look, how they talk, how they interact, the social mannerisms, the roles they're playing, right? And we're engaging in this idea of this construct equals this construct equals this, and we're less worried about the genitalia that we should not be seeing at that point, correct? Right? And so we're talking through this. We're talking about media as a social agent of construction of gender. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this in the last one, but media constructs exactly how and who we determine what feminine looks like, what masculine look like, how it might change, right? And we also determine what roles and how these individuals should act, right? So when you look at most media and you look at shows, when you're looking at especially when you look at like, okay, so look at any kind of sitcom show across time and space, right? You're going to look at the parent role. It's going to be mostly female. They're going to be in the household. The male's going to be the income provider. They're going to create this like mythical norm situation that we're going to talk about when we talk about Audre Lorde's piece in module 4. but they're creating these idyllic embodiments of what it means to be specific things: female, male, mother, father, partner, like all of these things. They're creating what we see, what we intake as the social perception of what we're supposed to be. And we as humans then try to live up to them or push back against them or whatever reaction we have. But those come into play when we start interacting with others, right? Are we going to embody what it is we know is that normative, or are we going to change how that interaction occurs, right? So the idea, I'm going to define a couple terms just so that we know. Defining stealth or passing, as they talk about it in this piece, is the idea that a trans person, if you're out on the street with them or you're interacting with them in a normal non-sexual contact, you're not going to necessarily know, right? They pass very well as the gender that they are expressing. But most of the world's going to go around and not think twice of them. The individuals that maybe might have a harder time passing, maybe a trans woman that is incredibly tall, maybe a trans male that had rather large breasts that have not been removed or they have no plans to, or a non-binary person that's not either one of these, don't necessarily pass in the same ways, and so they aren't allotted the same kind of freedoms. But when you do pass, and you can pass successfully and fill that role or that idyllic type, right, what you're doing is then allowing yourself maybe a level of safety or something. And there's lots of different reasons why you would pass or want to pass, right? But it definitely impacts your ability to be safe from social sanctions or violence or what have you, or these negative, all spectrums of negative reactions that might happen if you don't. So that's what they're talking about. And there's a varying degree of level of how and when someone can pass, or if that's acceptable. The idea of passing, though, still creates this idea of right versus wrong, or still creates this standard to which you have to meet in order to be female. So if I buzz cutted my hair for whatever reason because I wanted to, what have you, and I don't wear makeup ever, and I wear very masculine clothing, but still feel very female, I still am not necessarily, even regardless of this, passing is the way they want me to pass. And we're going to talk about this a lot when we talk about what it means to be a gendered me. But it's just that I want to embark upon this like idea that passing creates this this lack of validity in who they are, right? They don't have to pass to be a person that identifies as female. They don't have to be a person like that they don't have to be anything that's just that we create as a standard in society to be valid in who they are. And so just because someone can pass doesn't mean that the passing itself should be the only thing that validates whether or not they are who they say they are or who they feel they are. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on that. This is what the term is referring to. However, we want to make sure that we're validating people whether or not we feel like they meet up to some kind of social criteria we have created or that society has created. Okay. So ambiguous, like when somebody is ambiguous in their when you go up to them and you can't necessarily, they're very androgynous, and maybe their clothing choices or their haircut choices or just their options in general, and that may be intentional or maybe not, depending on the social circumstances or the setting itself. There becomes this like breakdown of interaction, right? There becomes this like anxiety within us that we can't figure out who you are, what your context is as other humans, and it breaks down our ability to interact with them. And again, this sometimes leads to concern, and sometimes leads to anger, sometimes leads to violence. And as a society, the more we like start to examine what it is that creates that fear or that thing, maybe we can break down that fear or that anxiety or that concern or that need to know about others constantly, right? As opposed to just interacting with a human because they're another human, right? I want to interact with you. I don't really give a damn what you're wearing, right? With the exception of I would like for you to be actually wearing clothing, right? And that's creating a different level of social standards and really examining how they impact our interactions with others is how we kind of create this different or break down this difference we have created within these spaces. And so we already talked about gender panics a bit, and I talked about this as we at the top, but I want to break down a little bit, especially when it comes to bathrooms. Gender panics generally happen in 3 different ways. They either happen based on this perceived notion of safety, this perceived notion of privacy, or this perceived notion of fairness, any of those things being or feeling like they are not happening at a level that they feel they should. And so we're going to break down this idea in public bathrooms. So 3 of the main arguments against trans person using the bathroom of their gender of choice versus the bathroom of the sex assigned at birth really comes down to these 3 arguments. It's not safe for women and children in women's bathrooms to have men coming in there, and or cis men will dress up as women just to get in there to assault them, right? It also breaks down into this argument of privacy. Well, but I don't have, like, I want privacy in my own spaces, and as women, we want privacy as women, and men, we want privacy as men, and we don't want to encourage this idea of those cross spaces, and we don't want to encourage this idea that we break privacy by letting one gender into a gendered space that we don't agree with. And because, again, all of these depend on this idea that a trans person is not valid, this is how you get these perceived notions of safety being broke, or privacy being broke, or fairness being broke. And again, fairness is like a better example when it comes to sports and this idea, but we've broken this down time after time in multiple other lectures, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it in this situation. But I want to also remind you that in most of these circumstances, the only spaces that we're talking about being disrupted with safety or privacy or fairness are women's spaces. Why? Because there's this assumption of male toughness, this assumption that men can fend for themselves, and that a trans man is actually a woman, so he can't actually threaten men in any capacity, whether it be compete with them athletically, whether it be compete with them for safety, whether it be whether they care about privacy, right? But there's still this invalidation of this trans man as being woman that creates this illusion of, well, women are more in need of being protected. They're more in need of being, they're more in need of that privacy. They're more in need of having a fair athletic activity, because we don't want, these superior men to come in and take all of their athletic prowess and blow everybody else in the sport out of the water, right? Okay, so there's still this idea, all of this surrounding this idea that women are this thing, men are this thing, and a trans person is the actual conception of what they were in as they were assigned, as opposed to what they are and move through society as. Okay, and so a lot of these panics come down to, again, this idea of, no, babies, you got to stay out there while mama's doing lectures. Please stop. Sorry, children. But a lot of these come down to this idea that there is this panic over, and what they call the penis panic in here, which I find both a little bit amusing, and also this concerning notion that, again, we are so worried that men are going to assault women that instead of actually dealing with this as an issue, we're going to use it as a justification for why trans women, because they may or may not have a penis, cannot use the bathroom in a place where no one should be engaging in anything other than pottying, washing your hands, and getting the hell out, right? So, it is interesting to me that this perceived safety issue has come from not only the idea that trans women, because they have a penis, are dangerous, but also that cis men, because they have a penis, are then inherently dangerous to women in these bathroom settings and are going to intentionally assault them. So what they're saying is this category of male is this creature of violence that is going to cause violence and disrupt in violent ways these women's spaces. When in actuality, trans women are far more likely to be assaulted in a bathroom than, incredibly far more likely to be assaulted in a bathroom than to have them ever assault a person. In fact, there is not on record a person of a trans woman assaulting women or children in a bathroom. There's a reason for that. as it comes to, again, privacy and safety, I want to make this very clear. If anyone, no matter, regardless of the gender, is doing anything in a public bathroom other than going to the bathroom, washing their hands, and leaving, that person needs to be dealt with, again, regardless of their gender, in a way that creates safety for anyone that's going to go into the bathroom. Correct? Right? Like, this has less to do with who the person is or what gender they are, and more to do with no one needs to be assaulting anyone in a bathroom, and anyone who's doing something super shady or super gross in a bathroom that would take away someone else's privacy or safety, then that needs to be stopped. A trans person going to the restroom like in a like cubicle by themselves is not doing anything more than another person and another female than another male or whoever else would normally be in the stall next to you and inherently doing their own business would be. It's not an inherent creation of danger. And that's something that we need to discuss in a better way. So that's kind of it for this. I want you to read this. This one is a longer piece, but it's really good, and it will break down some of our social ideas and how they are then created to enact fear within us. And I want to make sure that we're doing a good job of coming to terms with understanding how these messaging get brought in, what their purpose really is, and how they create difference and inequality for individuals just trying to go to the bathroom. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I will be back shortly to do the next one.